Hear me, Odin. We come before you with the most legendary of all podcasts spun by the Norns of Fate, the Pod People. I am Matisse Van Rossum, Allfather of the Pods.
I'm Hagar the Horrible. Oh, wait, no, I'm Ben Sheets.
Hello, I'm Val Cleveland Mosier.
Oh, okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Nice recovery.
Thank you. Cheers. Yeah, I didn't know what my name was going to be before the podcast, and right at the last second, I was like, "Oh, Val Cleveland, we'll do that."
Val Cleveland.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back after your brief absence.
Yes, it's good to be back. I'm back from PAX East in Boston. It was an absolutely lovely time. It was great, and I didn't get COVID. Which is rad. I was at a whole convention full of people.
Biggest plus.
Played it safe and came out good.
While you were in Boston, Ben and I did a little splish-splashing around with Jaws.
Paddling
too.
around with Jaws 2. How was it?
Okay.
Very okay.
I guess I can just listen to the
you
podcast.
can go back and listen to the episode.
Yeah, much
The
like our dear
definition
viewers.
of mid.
Yeah, exactly. But this week we're back to talk about our one of our most highly anticipated movies of the year.
Yes.
Robert Eggers is back with his Viking epic masterpiece, The Northman. You know, not really a horror movie, but Robert Eggers has, previous to this, done only horror movies. We've talked about him a lot on the podcast, so I think this movie is absolutely worth talking about, even though it's not really a horror movie.
It's hyper violent and rife with dark themes. We've talked about this sort of thing before in the past. Like, whether or not it's a horror movie, I definitely think it's a pod movie.
Yeah, it has the brutality of a horror movie.
Yeah.
We can say that much definitively.
For sure.
It's quite gory at times, very brutal. But yeah, well, we've talked about this movie a bit in the lead up to it coming out, but this is really a surprising film that actually was able to get made in the first place. Robert Eggers going from a budget of like generally between $5 and $10 million for his past films up to a budget of over $70 million for this one.
Yeah.
Would you mind if I briefly described the film?
Sure.
Go for it.
I've got a pretty, nuanced explanation of the movie. I think
By all means.
From my perspective, I think the film is largely 2 hours of ooh, ooh, yeah, ah, ooh, 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 for about 2 hours or so, I would say.
And hurdy-gurdy.
Yeah.
And hurdy-gurdy. And it fucking rocked. It fucking ruled. Dudes rock. Vikings rock. It was fucking awesome.
This is a dude's rock movie.
It is.
For
Yeah.
sure. This is for the boys.
This one's for the boys. And of course, saying that, I think that there's a lot to be said about the Robert Eggers' penchant for historical accuracy.
Yes.
And
He is the, I think, undisputed king of the period piece right now.
yes.
I will say it's a bit of a strange sort of anachronism, sort of novelty that he got such a big budget, you know, nowadays, because we have seen like the large budget non-Marvel, non-Star Wars, non-cinematic
Non-Disney,
universe movies kind of die in the last couple decades. So to see like an art house director get this big a budget is something we haven't really seen much of since like the 90s,
Yep.
I would say.
Unfortunately, something that we may not see again. We can talk more about that later.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes it particularly interesting, because this is probably Robert Eggers' last big budget movie.
Yeah. For a while, at least.
yeah.
But the fact that it got made in the first place is awesome, and I'm so glad that it exists.
Yeah, whatever the ratings and all that may be, we enjoyed the shit out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's a surprise to any of us.
Let's kind of talk about the approach here, right? Because since it's a big budget movie, they decided to take a very streamlined approach to the narrative, more so than something like The Lighthouse or The Witch, and really simplified it. Essentially, it's the story of Amleth, which is the original story that Hamlet was based off of. And so it tells this very straightforward story of revenge, you know, a son seeking vengeance for his father that is killed by his uncle.
Yep.
And his mother is taken by the uncle.
Uncle comes in, kills the king, steals the queen and the kingdom. Young prince must flee into exile to avoid death. Years later, comes back seeking vengeance.
Seeking vengeance.
And of course, you know, the story has been told a million times, and we've seen that story plenty.
Yeah.
Especially in Conan the Barbarian.
And I will say, like, the story beats are pretty predictable.
Yep.
But I think the area which this film shines is much like Robert Eggers' other, you know, films. It's in the detail of the environment and the historical accuracy and things
Dialogue.
like that. And the
atmosphere.
detail, the atmosphere. It's it really elevates the simple story to something much more.
Yeah, and you mentioned the dialogue, Cleve, and I think that this is somewhat of a departure from Eggers' typical style of dialogue, because this is sort of an epic and spans like a long period of time, and has more characters. I think the dialogue is largely more utilitarian than anything else. Mm-hmm. It mostly serves for driving the plot forward more than anything else.
Yeah, much of this tale is told pictorially, but
whereas stuff like
there are a few moments I want to.
Of course, yeah, there are a couple of like big highlights, especially in terms of monologues. But whereas
which Eggers has always excelled at.
Whereas something with like The Witch or The Lighthouse, which are more small scale stories, smaller cast, usually, you know, centered around a couple of people or a family,
one location,
going crazy in a single location. You know, there's more time for like character moments in the dialogue, and this is kind of just like, okay, here's where you need to go now to get the thing so you can wreak vengeance on your nasty uncle, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not to say that like the film is sparse. Like, it's, especially visually, but just in like the detail of like everything, it's so rich. Ben and I saw it twice. Mm-hmm. We saw it the week it came out while you were in PAX, and then the three of us went to see it again a couple nights ago. And man, I'm so glad I've had an opportunity to see this movie twice before we talk about it on the podcast, because I feel like I got even more from it on the second.
Yeah, I believe that.
Because it's long, and there's just so much detail packed in there. There's so much to take in.
Oh, yes.
So let's start by talking a little bit about performances. You know, Skarsgård is obviously the standout in the lead. Absolutely jacked in this movie.
Jesus Christ.
Abs on abs on abs on abs on abs.
Delts above his neckline, just
wasn't when he all said
shredded
that he was eating like 5,000 calories a day or something like that?
Yeah, I saw it's just like a YouTube thumbnail from his nutritionist saying like he ate 5 meals a day. And I was thinking, like, damn, I could eat 5 meals a day, but I don't think I'd look like that. But obviously, like it's the workout regimen, which I can only imagine. Like, as soon as they called cut on this movie, like Alexander Skarsgård was like, finally, I can like lie down for the first time in like 6 months. I can even imagine what that regimen has got to look like. You know, like to stay in shape like that, it's got to be.
It pays off.
Deeply
it pays
painful
off for this movie, though.
And excruciating, and probably really boring. Also, like to keep your body in like that level of.
It's the kind of thing
shape.
Where when you're working on the production of the film, when you're not filming or sleeping, you're exercising.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nonstop.
And I will say, you know, I watched a couple interviews with Robert Eggers after seeing it the first time. And one of the things he said is Skarsgård approached him about wanting to make a Viking movie. And originally Robert Eggers wasn't really interested in doing a Viking movie, you know, because of kind of the white nationalist stuff with Viking culture, which we can get into a little bit more.
To appropriate Viking symbols and shit
but
like that. Yeah.
Because this was such almost sort of a passion project for Skarsgård, he helped get some of the other actors on board, and you know, him getting jacked was definitely motivated by this being a movie he wanted to make specifically.
Which is pretty dope.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That is cool.
And I mean, man, I think he does a great job. Like he's fucking
phenomenal.
He's fucking in it to win it. He's very good. His performance is excellent. He looks great. The physique is chef's kiss.
Yeah, right on those pecs.
Yeah.
Those cum gutters, man. I gotta tell you.
He's out here.
Yeah. I hate that term, but
Spends a lot of the movie naked too. So
yes, he does.
If that's your thing, there's plenty of eye candy in this movie.
Oh yeah, if you're a Top Gun fan, you're gonna like this movie for sure. Dudes rock.
Dudes rock.
Yeah, so we get a great performance from him. We get a couple of Eggers regulars in Willem Dafoe.
Regulars?
Regulars. No, it's not.
It didn't work. I tried.
Willem Dafoe and Anya Taylor-Joy both show up.
We even
give excellent performances.
We even get a cameo from the dad and the witch.
Yeah,
as
Ralph Ineson.
Ralph Ineson is the boatsman, the boatsman.
And Kate Dickey, the mother in The Witch, is one of the slaves on the farm. There's a ton of like really great actors in this. In fact, one of my only like minor complaints about the movie is that a few of them don't get enough screen time.
Yeah.
Yes, especially Willem Dafoe. He gives such a great performance as the jester in this movie that I wanted to see more of that.
I just wrote a whole movie of that.
Yeah.
That was
not
great.
enough Willem Dafoe, not enough Ralph Ineson, not enough Bjork, frankly.
I will say, that's a key player that we didn't mention. Bjork makes her first cinematic appearance in like 20 years.
Since
almost.
Dancer in the Dark.
Yeah. Which is awesome. She gets a really fantastic performance.
Yeah,
it's essentially just one monologue, but
she's in 2 minutes of the movie.
She's so cool. I love her makeup. It's just incredible, and costuming. Like the way like her face is lit, where it's like her face is largely has like white makeup over it, and then like across the eyes it's dark, and then hanging up from her headdress are like 3 shells, and they kind of like replace where the eyes would be as these like weird beady kind of alien shapes. It's so fucking spooky to look at. I loved her costuming.
Yeah, essentially Bjork makes a cameo as herself.
Yes. Totally.
The credits really should have said Bjork as herself. Damn, you're so right. Yeah, like it's this like weird Russian witch.
She's the perfect casting.
Yeah,
Icelandic witch.
No, that's
that's when they're in the land of the Rus.
Yeah, in the Rus. That's Russia.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well,
gotcha.
I was mostly just saying Bjork is Icelandic and she's playing herself.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. But yeah, in this, that's when he goes to the land of Rus.
Which I feel like in the context of this movie probably would have been Finland.
Yeah, he probably didn't go that far, but
because I mean Finland used to be part of that part of Russia, or what was considered Russia back then.
What'd y'all think of Nicole Kidman in this movie? I think she gave a fantastic performance.
I think she did.
I gotta say, the AMC Nicole Kidman pre-roll really hit different when she's in the movie. Somehow Heartbreak does feel good in a place like this.
Well, they gave us plenty of pre-roll.
5 of them. Jesus Christ. No, I thought Nicole Kidman's fantastic in this. She has probably like the monologue of the film.
Yes. I will say that, especially in the latter half, that it didn't take me out of the movie or anything else like that, but Nicole Kidman in the past few years has had a lot of Botox, and it did sort of break some of the naturalism for me, being like all of her Botoxiness of her face.
She has had a lot of plastic surgery
in is what is otherwise like a pretty like perfectly tailored historical environment. It's like, kind of interesting, but she did a phenomenal job. I don't think that's enough for a recast or anything else like that. Like I wouldn't change anything about it, but I do think it's worth commenting on a little bit, being like, like she's had a lot of work done, and it's kind of
hey, who knows? You don't know what kind of herbs and poultices they were rubbing on their skin to keep themselves looking young back in those days.
I gotta say, Nicole Kidman, still a dime. I don't care about whether she had Botox or not. Like, and the thing is with this movie, like, she is still expressive, even though her face doesn't move quite as much as it might have in the past. I'll just put it that way.
I think she gives a phenomenal performance.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's a bad performance in this whole movie.
No, fuck no.
Not at all. Ethan Hawke. Yes. Well done.
Wow, nice. Yeah, somebody who else we haven't mentioned who's great in this.
I loved the psychedelic coming of age sequence.
Yes.
With Ethan Hawke and the kid and Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Young man.
So the film starts with Ethan Hawke returning to his little kingdom from war.
It's all very Beowulfy.
Yes, it's sweet. But he comes back and he has been wounded, and it kind of has him thinking like, I need to make sure that Amleth is ready to be my successor in case, next time I don't come back. So, I'm going to take him to do this sort of coming of age ritual that I did with my father and he did with his father before him, where they go into the temple, go down underground, drink some psychedelic potion, the mead of knowledge, and pretend to be wolves, pretend to be animals.
Go on down, sip some of that seaweed water, is it trippy seaweed water, and howl a little bit. Yeah, it's pretty fun. I like the Erd tree shots.
I absolutely
Sorry, I'm gonna be making accidental Elden Ring.
Well, I will say after we watched it the first time, I turned to Tease and I was like, this is kind of like Robert Eggers' Elden Ring, right? Like, it's going from like
Egden Ring,
a smaller scale type of thing to a very large, gigantic thing,
much larger scale,
and it nails it. Much like Elden Ring does.
Sticks to landing. Yeah, we've all got Elden Ring on the brain still.
So y'all just get ready. There's going to be more references.
But I will say, in that psychedelic sequence, I absolutely love how Willem Dafoe is shot. Like, he is shot where the light is coming from under him almost, and it's almost like an otherworldly look to his face while he gives this kind of wide-eyed kind of
speech about shedding your skin and becoming a wolf. And it's cool because up until that point we only see him like wearing this like jester, like weird kind of bondagey looking mask to indicate that he's the fool.
Yes.
And in that sequence it starts with him wearing it and it kind of cuts back and forth, and it gave me the vibe that like almost like the kid is like seeing through the mask. Even something as small as that, we don't know what exactly we're perceiving and how much time has passed. This was very cool. And yeah, just that whole talk about like shedding your skin and all the berserker stuff.
Yeah,
was really neat.
Just excellent sequence. And one thing that's kind of a departure from Eggers' other stuff is, Eggers in the past has been very focused on practical effects, where this movie has some CG.
Quite a bit of CG, really.
I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think of the CG in this movie?
I loved it. I thought it was almost exclusively used for enhancing the psychedelic magical realism moments.
Yes.
Like, it was, whenever the CG was used, it was used for fantasy. Like, it was used for visions of fantasy, I should say.
I thought it was extremely tasteful and high quality as well.
Any time outside of that, if or when it was being used, like possibly for digital mats or, whatever else, because, like in some of those shots of like the mountains in the background, like they were having to mask out the trailers or whatever else. Like that just comes with the territory. But I certainly never noticed it.
Yeah.
Or there's never a time where I saw a castle in the distance and didn't think that castle just wasn't fucking there.
Yeah.
Absolutely
or a series
not
of buildings.
Immersion breaking at all.
No, it's all you can touch. Like apart from those visions, you can reach out and touch most of this film.
And that's I think the important thing is that, like you mentioned, the CG is really meant to enhance moments of magical realism where Amleth is having visions or something. So it's not heavy-handed. It's brief, and that it's not supposed to be literal.
Yes.
The scene in the cave with Ethan Hawke and Amleth ends with, Ethan Hawke undoing his bandages and like forcing Amleth to like put his fingers like in his wound, and he says something like, "Behold, in our blood the tree of kings," and it like sort of goes into his chest, and you see his heart beating, and then it like branches up into this massive tree from which like the bodies of like their entire line and ancestors are like hanging up to the top, where you see Ethan Hawke, and then it goes above him, and then, you know, like Emleth is the top of the tree. It's fucking awesome.
It's so cool. Lineage is a really big theme of this film.
I was about to say, yeah, that's a huge theme of this film, and it's even referenced later with kind of a tapestry.
Yes, in the house where Fjolnir and Nicole Kidman are. Yeah, there's the tapestry with the tree. I mean, that's also, you know, just kind of big in Norse mythology, is Yggdrasil, the tree of knowledge.
Would you call it a tapestry?
Tree?
Ooh.
I would.
Yeah.
I would.
I want to put a footnote on that and mention that, you know, for as much as we talk about this being a dude's rock film, and, you know, it is very, you know, gamer male fantasy, or whatever you want to put it. I think one of the things I really like about this film is how it highlights it. Okay, so it's really hard to do this, I think. And I think this film does a phenomenal job of it, of showing like how, I hate to use this word, I don't have a better word for it, like, and I feel kind of cringy like using the word, but like it does show like the endemic like patriarchy and toxic masculinity of that time, where there wasn't functioning plumbing, you know, like, and it's like, well, yeah, that's how that society was, and it doesn't shy away from it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't glorify it to me.
That's important.
And that's it's really important.
That's important because
and it's hard to do that.
There's a lot of, and we'll talk more about this as we go, but there's a lot of discourse around this movie already, as there always has to be for movies like this.
Yeah.
But, you know, a part of it hinges on the sort of toxic masculinity and chauvinism and stuff like that. And I don't understand how you can watch this movie and think that it's like glorifying the way that these people are
any more than this movie glorifies slavery.
Well, that's the thing. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Right.
You look
like,
at something like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where it's just kind of a cosplay, reskinned version of something, where it's really glossing over kind of the negative
were woke, actually.
aspects. Yeah, where you look at something like this, and they don't shy away from the raping and pillaging that are done. You know,
slavery, because like that's something that's really important to note.
Extreme violence.
Like if you were to like go on YouTube right now, like this is something I've done a lot, because I went on a big binge of like Viking culture and like learning about like that era of history, especially because like so little is known about it. After playing Hellblade, like Senua's Sacrifice,
after January 6th.
And so bad timing, but yeah, so for very different reasons, I went in, and also like, you know, I've got a lot of that ancestry as well, and that's whatever. I'm not like super tethered to it. I grew up in South Alabama, like, you know what I mean? Like it's not.
Yeah.
But I do still find it fascinating and very cool, and the aesthetic is really neat. And so I started like, you know, watching like videos and like lectures on it, and like one of the first things that's going to come up for you is, guess what? The Vikings had a lot of slaves. Like, and you're going to have to like you need to face that shit. And just like recognize that that's a huge factor of it.
Really, most tribal cultures in the world.
Yeah, no shit. Like
1,000 years ago did have slaves.
Yeah, and like there are many facets of slavery and many cultures of it too, and it varies in what that means. All bad. No shit.
Yes.
Like all bad, but like it's.
But this film doesn't try to say that slavery wasn't bad.
Fuck no,
either.
it doesn't.
It's just like these people had slaves.
Yeah,
it's just the reality of it.
Of course, and I think that like this film does some other things where it allows to have like all perspectives shown, and like you have that outside looking in and inside looking out. That goes for the feminist aspects as well. Like you see how like both women and men are treated in this film from both sides, and of course, like I think that's all that any period film should do to do it right. Clearly these things are wrong and bad, but we can see in what capacities. because it's human history, you know, like, and that's important to note. I appreciated a lot of that.
The story of this film hinges on a slave revolt.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's not advocating for slavery and the strength of slavery. Like, the story in the background, there is a slave revolt.
Well, not even in the background. I mean, leading up into the first part, we see Ethan Hawke, who is shown to be like, he's supposed to be like the good guy at that point. Like, when he's coming back home from pillaging, he's carting slaves.
Yeah.
And when Skarsgård like leaves in exile and joins the Bear Clan, they're snagging slaves. You know, like they're basically and they're selling him as chattel. And he's our protagonist. You know.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there's really a hero in this movie.
No, fuck no, there's not.
Like, you know, obviously
there's a protagonist, but it's not a hero.
Is our protagonist, but I don't feel like the film ever really tries to depict him as being like virtuous or anything. Like,
No.
it just kind of
Largely the opposite.
It just is. Like, this is a film where there aren't really any good guys.
Well, I will say, like, I guess minor spoilers. The story's been told plenty of times, but
If you've read Hamlet
you
in
know,
high school,
yeah,
you know what happens.
When Nicole Kidman reveals that she was a slave, that kind of complicates things in a big way, and shows that, like you said, there's no real heroes in this.
Yeah.
It's much more morally complicated and gray than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a big turning point in the film when adult Amleth reveals himself to his mother and is like, "Hey, I'm here to kill Fjolnir and free you and avenge father." And she's like, like, "No, you stupid little piece of shit. Like, I'm the one who asked your uncle to kill your father because I hated your father. He was a fucking asshole, you know?"
Then there's a moment where he says, like, "No, but you were screaming when he took you away." And she says, "No,
Like, no,
I was laughing." You guys had seen it a second time. Did it sound like she was laughing at the beginning to you?
No, it sounded like
does sound like she's screaming.
Okay, I wanted to ask about
So
that.
there's that.
That's cool. That's really cool.
There's that ambiguity of whether it's like Stockholm syndrome or whether
Right, we don't know.
You
That's
know,
re-
but she
awesome.
does say that she asked Fjolnir to kill his brother because, you know, she was not, as she told Amleth as a boy, she was not a noble woman from Brittany, but she was a slave.
Who's Brittany?
I don't know, some bitch.
One thing that I noticed in that scene when she was taken is she is screaming, but in the background there are other people laughing.
Yeah.
Which adds some additional
that's
ambiguity
cool.
to
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah,
And also,
there's
you know,
crossed
like-
wires and mixed
Yeah.
signals. Yeah,
And you know, there's also an argument, you know, that because we are seeing the entire film through Amleth's eyes, all that matters is that he perceived it as her screaming, so that's how we saw it as well.
Right.
You know, because we see his visions, we see what he interprets everything as being. Like, I even noticed that, and we'll talk about this scene in a little bit, but when the berserkers are getting ready to raid the village, that, like, as they're walking up, like, it's just like wolf
Actual
and
wolf
bear
sounds,
So, you know, I think that there's that to take into consideration as well, is that, like, Amleth is potentially, probably, very highly probably an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Oh, and what's cool is, and I think what's so neat about that is featuring an unreliable narrator as your protagonist in a historical film, especially about this culture, is a really, really good idea, because so much of the history around this culture is uncertain. You know, we're looking at like 400 AD, right? Like, this
900 AD.
Yeah. So, yeah.
10th century.
So, like, in a culture that, like, you know, did not keep a lot of its writing. Most of what we know about this culture is from other cultures,
Well,
which is why, like, with there are several, like, historic accounts of berserkers where, like, they describe them as, like, yeah, they were werewolves, dog. Like which I mean, if your fort is being taken by people, like it's a really good excuse, you know, if they're like actual werewolves and shit, you know.
Yeah.
So like incorporating like the audio there, you know, when they're just wearing bear pelts is a really clever way to kind of show like that blurred line of like ancestral and historic memory.
Well, the story of Amleth itself is, I was doing some reading on this a couple of nights ago. It's widely attributed to being based on an old Icelandic poem, but no physical evidence of that original poem actually remains. The earliest like written story is from like Denmark in like 1200 something, and they say like, oh yeah, this was an old Icelandic poem, but it's like there's no physical evidence for that, you know.
What I like too is it's a wonderful opportunity for even more amalgamation. One of my favorite little nods is he's from the Wolf Clan, right? Like he has the wolf thing where he sheds his skin and becomes a wolf. And then later on, he joins the Bear Clan and he sheds his skin and does that. And later on, he's referred to as the Bear Wolf, a.k.a. Beowulf. Pretty dope, right? I was like, oh yeah, Beowulf reference. Fuck yeah. Like that was really fun.
Well, yeah, Bjornwolfen is the name that he takes for himself after he flees.
The Bear Wolf.
Yeah, because he can't. He can't use his given name. So yeah, he is Beowulf when he is with the berserkers.
Just fucking awesome.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that scene, because even though
my favorite scene in the movie,
it plays a relatively small part in the movie, it is one of the coolest things I've
amazing.
It's the most immersive sequence. Also,
yeah.
I did really like that the head of the Bear Clan has horns, because historically, like Vikings, as far as we know, didn't have horned helmets. The only account of a Viking having a horned helmet was I believe, Arabic writer who like encountered Vikings and said one of them had horns. And like, I mean, I buy it.
That was like also in that scene where they're doing their berserker ceremony where they're becoming animals. That character is not wearing that horned helm later when they go into battle. So I think it's a headdress. It's a ceremonial headdress.
Well, and there would be, and because it's not convenient in battle.
No.
But
it's not practical, but it looks cool.
It looks fucking cool. And honestly, like, I don't know, like between all of us, we're wearing very different clothing for the culture that we're in, right? Like, I don't see it as an uncommon thing for like some people like to be like, yo, horns are fucking cool on my head. I'm gonna wear some. I'm gonna put some on my helmet. You know, like you might get an occasional guy. So having like one guy with horns on his helmet was fun. And, like, you know, because, you know, maybe, who knows? Like that's the cool thing about it. It's that part of history is really ambiguous. You can get away with that.
I absolutely love how the siege is shot.
Yes.
We have the incredible shot where, they're sneaking up towards the village and they're spotted, and someone from the guard post throws a spear, and Skarsgård catches it midair and throws it back.
Yeah, he's just like really nice,
so
like
fucking cool
pivot turn, and like his form is perfect, and he absolutely gores the guy. Like it's so good. And then
like, oh shit, Vikings! Spear throw. He just calmly stands up, grabs it out of the air, turns on his heel, throws it at the guy, and just like knocks him off the wall.
Yeah, I cannot even imagine like shooting that. Like,
well, I mean,
because obviously things were faked, obviously,
of course.
But what things? Right, and so that's what I want to know. I want to know how that was shot, because I can see a number of ways. But and then afterwards, when he scales the wall while they're all being shot at and falling, he scales the wall essentially one-handed with an axe.
Yep.
Or a hatchet, and then he gets to the top of the wall, kills a dude, and then leaps off the other side and kills via dismount another guy. Like he falls and takes a guy off of a horse. That is a insanely difficult stunt. Horses are hard to work with like that, and like I can't even imagine. Again, obviously
they do
things were fake.
They use their tricks.
But man, what tricks? They're masked so well. You know, like I couldn't tell you.
I mean, they do some tricks and stuff for sure, but like somebody, whether it was Skarsgård or not, somebody jumped off of that wall and pulled somebody from the top of a horse on their way down.
Yeah.
Like that.
In some capacity, a really impressive practical feat is involved.
That happened. Yeah, but I mean, then, you know, then it just goes through as the berserkers rage through the village, and then the rest of the soldiers, the non-berserker soldiers, come in to pick up the scraps. And I mean, Eggers does lots of like long single takes. I think the whole siege of the village is 3 shots.
Yeah.
Three long takes.
I can't even imagine.
Two or 3. There's one obvious cut when he jumps from the wall onto the horse. That's a hard cut.
Yes.
There could be another cut when the camera passes in front of, or the wall passes in front of the camera. They could have hidden a cut there.
Yeah.
Well, they had to. We had pivoted around beforehand, and like
no, they could have done that shot continuously because it comes up the wall. They could have handed the camera over to somebody who was standing on top of the wall.
the camera went through. Like,
No,
I thought there was a removal.
No, it goes up and then over, and it passes in front of like one of the battlements. So they could have hidden a cut there. They may or may not have. Hard to say.
Either way,
yeah.
Impressive.
But then Amleth, going through the village and killing other soldiers. I love the part where he like puts the guy up against the wall with his sword and then just sort of like walks along and slits his throat.
Just an absolutely brutal sequence.
Yeah.
Like when the guy is like shooting arrows at him and then coming at him with an axe on a horse, and he dismounts that guy and like shoves his face into the mud.
Well, and he rips his throat out with his teeth.
Yeah.
Like a fucking animal.
Yeah, Roadhouse ultimate.
Because he quote is one.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
from
this perspective.
I love how that scene ends with just like the shot of all the berserkers like crouched in front of like the house, and they're all just like
just exhausted.
They're just like, yeah, they're like the adrenaline has worn off and they're just like dead.
Yeah. I will say the end of that whole scene is so bleak when they're rounding up all the villagers and children and women and putting them into this thatched roof hut.
My favorite thing about that is it's largely instigated by a series of like, it would assume to be like the reinforcements, from the Bear Clan, to take over, since the berserkers are now tanked and sleepy. But like helming that group is a very, very powerful woman. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. And she's the one who says, "I want only the strong ones." Yeah. And then leaves the shot, and we never see her again. And I really loved that because
girls get it done.
Girls get it done. And like I love that because maybe not for the reasons you'd expect, but historically, I think it was a year or so ago, like they did an analysis on like a funeral site where like a Viking warrior was buried, and it was a woman, and she had all sorts of battle damage, like axe wounds. They think that like she had died from like taking an axe wound to the head, and it was very clear that like she was a warrior.
Well, she was buried. The reason they assumed that it was male originally was because the body was buried with a shield and an axe and a sword. So they're just like, oh, it was obviously a man, right?
Yeah, and
so
it's
then
like
when they did the actual forensic analysis, they're like, nah, this was actually a woman.
Yeah, and it was like they had wounds that like had been like from years before they died. So like they'd encountered like lots of battle wounds like to bone and kept like fighting for several more years. That's badass as fuck. And frankly, I love it too because it puts a lot of those like fucking right-wingy like historical fuckers where it's like, oh well, it's not accurate because there are strong women. And it's like, yeah, fuck
Varg,
you. Like there were strong women.
Varg would hate that.
I know. And it's like
that.
like yeah, take your fucking like obviously the time was patriarchal, it was fucked or whatever, but like hey, guess what, dog? There were strong women. There were like warriors like who would go in and you encounter that like if you're actually into history, you encounter that shit like across the board.
The time.
And also narratively, it's I think really valuable to keep things gray. You not keep things good for not to keep Skarsgård in like a positive light, but to keep him in a gray light where like in this culture that he is in, like it's like a powerful woman who makes the call to like burn all of like the weak children. It's a small note, but it's cool.
I mean, again, I think the entire film takes that perspective. Like, Eggers is a history guy. He's very much about being as historically accurate as possible and presenting these stories as, like, aspects of our history and folklore. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can view the movie as, like, glorifying or idealizing Skarsgård after we see this scene of like his brutality in killing people and being complicit in them like putting all of the weak and elderly and children into a house and burning it down because they're not good slaves.
Yep.
Like I don't know how you can watch this movie and be like, yeah, Robert Eggers is saying that all of this stuff is good. It's like, no, this was just the reality of existence back then.
Yeah.
Like, this is just the way it was. I mean, fucking hell, like, their very religion was based on the idea that if you don't die in battle, you die dishonorably and you go to hell. The only way to enter Valhalla is to die honorably in battle. Yep. Like, so of course, people who believe that and believe that their entire afterlife, their eternal existence is dependent on dying in battle, of course they're going to be out raiding and fighting constantly, right? Because they don't want to run the risk that they catch fucking dysentery and shit themselves to death dishonorably.
And of course, like, you know, even in that, they're going to be practicing like their like eugenics. You know,
totally,
and like killing the weak. Their whole society is based on, you know, war. So yeah, like no shit, they're going to be doing that. You know, much like the Spartans, much like the rest. You know,
it's like people calling. It's like I have as many problems as I have with his filmmaking. Like it's like people calling Zack Snyder far right because at the beginning of 300 they throw a deformed baby off a cliff.
Yeah, they did that shit.
Yeah.
It's like that's. It's not saying that it's good, but that's what people did.
I want to save a little bit of discussion on the discourse for at the end of the episode because there are some stupid takes out there that we should just emphasize.
There always are.
But one thing I wanted to talk about is shortly after that scene and the fantastic Bjork scene, we have the introduction
Fantastic Bjorks and where to find them.
God damn it.
Fantastic Bjorks, The Crimes of Grumblegrind.
We have the great introduction of Skarsgård's sword.
Yes. The Night Blade.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love the retelling of how it was created.
Forged in the fires of Mount Doom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Essentially.
From the rarest iron.
Yeah. That whole monologue about like the way this thing was forged was very Tolkien-esque.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And
I mean, he sees it as a vision. You know, it's forged by these mythical war smiths in the fires of hell. You know.
Yeah. And what comes of that that's really neat is like that we have to remember that Tolkien also was a big student of history and studied a massive amount of like Norse mythology, and other mythologies were worked into Lord of the Rings as well. I mean, if we just look at like the Riders of Rohan, like that whole sequence is essentially like a recanvassing of Beowulf. And like Hrothgar's Hall and all of that, like and them being like a horse culture, like that's all built around and a lot of the words in Elvish and whatnot are based in, like that's the same mythologies.
Tolkien was a nerd, just like Eggers is a nerd.
Just like Martin and Miyazaki are nerds as well. Yeah. And like in Elden Ring, like they do the same thing. They pull from those similar facets in a cool way.
I'm glad you mentioned Miyazaki, because the scene where he gets the sword from the very
from the undead king.
Yeah, king it feels like it's straight out of Dark Souls.
Yeah, I sort of just like, I remember that boss fight,
That's a fucking Souls fight. Yeah. Well, I love it too, because like after he fights this big undead king in this barrow mound, he cuts off his head, and there's a nice little touch of him putting the head like between his legs, so like he's sniffing his own ass. But then like the camera pans over, and it's just him standing in front of the corpse, and he like takes
it's his imagination.
It's his imagination. It's like, well, that's what's so incredible about this movie. What I love about this movie is that like, from a very young age, when he's taken to do this ritual with his father and imbibes some sort of psychedelic potion, like all he's told about is his destiny, what's destined of him. In that whole thing, his father says, like, if I fall in battle, you must avenge me. And then immediately after that is killed by Fjolnir.
Yep.
Right? So, and that's when he has the vision of the tree. So everything from this point on is Amleth basically imagining his destiny.
Yeah. I will say, this is a bit of a tangent, but after seeing that sequence where he's fighting the undead king, it just made me really, really fucking want to see a Dark Souls or Elden Ring movie directed by Robert Eggers.
Yes.
Because like both Eggers and Miyazaki have such an eye for detail.
Yeah.
And atmosphere that like that would be fucking awesome. And obviously with this movie kind of bombing, I doubt it would ever happen.
Yeah.
But like, it seems like such a great match right there.
Somebody like Eggers would be the only one I would trust to make any kind of like FromSoft adaptation. But I don't know if Eggers is a video game guy. I think he's too much of a history nerd. I think he likes doing research too much to play video games. I don't think he has the time for it.
I mean, honestly, like his upcoming eventual Nosferatu,
which has been shelved again.
Yeah, if it's ever gonna happen.
If it ever happens.
Yeah,
but...
I mean, if it ever happens, that's a Bloodborne ass movie if I've ever heard of one.
Big true.
So, something that I want to talk about, because we haven't talked about it much yet, I want to talk about Fjolnir, Amleth's uncle, and I want to talk about one of my core theses on the film, which is Fjolnir did almost nothing wrong. I think
big almost.
Yeah, I won't say that Fjolnir did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But I do think that Fjolnir is not nearly as much of a villain as Amleth believes him to be.
Deeply gray.
I don't think he quite deserves the horrible vengeance that Amleth wreaks upon him.
I don't think anyone does. Like, that's the thing, right? Like,
we'll talk about Fjolnir first. Another great performance. He's played by Danish actor Claes Bang, which is a great name. And he gives another great performance.
A banger.
But he's a banger. So
has he been in anything else that I've seen? He was the only actor I didn't recognize.
He's in Game of Thrones. But that might be wrong.
I don't know.
If so, he's a tertiary character.
Bit part, yeah. So the things to know about his character.
He looks like he would be.
Yeah. Fjolnir is it's mentioned that he is a bastard. He is Arvendil's brother, but not a legitimate heir to any sort of throne. He's a bastard brother. So while we don't necessarily see this, I feel like he was probably treated disdainfully for most of his life, probably by Arvendil as well, who, when Fjolnir is about to kill him, calls him a half-breed and says that...
Disdainfully.
he calls him a half-breed and says that no half-breed will ever be able to hold the throne. Like, his kingdom will be taken from him, which does end up happening. That's something that Amleth learned years later when he hears of Fjolnir, and he's like, oh, these slaves are being sent to Fjolnir in Iceland. And he's like, oh, what's Fjolnir doing in Iceland? He's supposed to be king of, wherever Amleth comes from. It's like, oh yeah, somebody else came in and took that kingdom from him, so he ran off to this fucking, backcountry, barren island.
He's a sheep farmer now.
Yes,
Yeah. I love
he's
that.
He's no longer a king. He is a quote unquote tribal chieftain, but he is the chieftain of a farm.
Yeah.
So Eveleth shows up, and with the slaves being sent to Fjolnir, and he still has slaves and servants and a few warriors and whatnot, but his kingdom is nothing at this point.
It really is the historic equivalent of an Instagram quote celebrity who has 500 followers.
Yeah. Well, it's great because when he gets the shipment of slaves, he turns away all but 3 or 4 of them because he can't feed all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He's about to send them all away, and then Amleth, does a show of strength, and okay, we'll keep him because he's strong. And then,
boy.
his son is oh, well, mom needs a couple for the kitchens, and he's okay, we'll take these 2. But he gets rid of the rest of them because he doesn't have food for them because the farm's not big enough. So his kingdom is nothing. He has no kingdom anymore, but at the same time, doesn't necessarily seem like he cares. Our introduction to him...
Well, he doesn't show it.
Our introduction to him at this later stage of his life, once he's in Iceland, is him and his son, building something for their temple, and the son is this is slave work, why are we doing this? And Fjolnir is well, you don't know whether by next Yuletide you'll be a king or a slave, so might as well show that you can be both. And also show your slaves that you're as strong as they are. So it's I feel the way it's presented is that Fjolnir is kind of at peace with his position in the world now, which leads me to believe that killing his brother was never so much about claiming his kingdom as it was about maybe getting revenge on his asshole brother, but also being in love with Nicole Kidman and wanting to make her his wife.
Yeah.
Also, and this is getting into the deep nerd shit, because I did some more reading, and I noticed that another difference is that Arvindil and Amleth are worshippers of Odin, right? The Allfather, who is the Norse god of war and knowledge and treachery and all of that shit, but
One-eye crows, all that stuff.
Yes. Fjolnir worships a different god. Fjolnir worships Freyr, who is the twin brother of Freya, and he is a god of peace and pleasure and fertility and harvest. I do think that it's an interesting distinction that, Amleth and his father and their tribe are, their patron deity is Odin, the god of war, whereas Fjolnir, his patron deity is a god of agriculture and pleasure. And
which
peace,
shows in their
and
culture.
Peace.
They not only are take of agriculture, they also have a small festival.
Yeah, well, and their
taking pleasure.
Their statue of Freyr has a big fucking throbbing erection. It's got a big cock. So, I think that that's interesting that that's Fjolnir and his deity and his people who are, and, they do still do human sacrifices and stuff, and they are warlike as the Viking culture dictates, but dictates. But that's another reason why I think it's Amleth is following in his father's warlike footsteps. Odin is guiding his path in vengeance against a guy who's yeah, I got a farm. I'm just hanging out, So that's I don't think Fjolnir's all that evil.
Well, yeah. Well, let's cut to him also picking Anya Taylor-Joy out of the set of
because she's hot.
slaves
Yeah.
because she's hot and blonde and
She has
clearly
the hair of a Valkyrie.
yeah, clearly for himself, and later him trying to have his way with her, very much so against her will, and her pulling a little bit of trickery on him by making him think that she's on the rag, which I thought was very clever.
Is it trickery? I thought she just was on her period.
Yeah.
No, I think it's trickery because she does that several times. Like her whole theme of her character is that she's a witch. In some capacity.
Olga of the Birch Forest.
Yeah, Olga of the Birch Forest. And
Slavic
the first
forest witch.
she is introduced to us with her playing a trick. She comes out as like people are trying to take her little brother away. I think it's a little brother or like one of the children.
Somebody,
away.
one of the children.
And she's carrying like either a loaf of bread or a pie or something. And beneath, and it's shown like she's kind of thrown to the side, and the bread is also thrown to the side, and you see that underneath it she was carrying a knife.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, like she does that with like saying that she's, like her moon is rising or whatever the fuck, they would say back then. Like like she's on the rag, she's having her period. And so, like...
I mean, I don't think that necessarily has to be a trick. She does plenty of other tricksy stuff, but women do be having their periods.
Of course. But I
don't think there's anything that suggests that moment is necessarily a trick.
Well,
but
she plays a trick in that by, taking her hand to the blood and putting it in his face.
On his face, she marks him. Yeah. Well, and I mean, she does do plenty of tricky stuff later. Like she and Emleth fall in love, and she helps him. She uses her forest magic to put psychedelic mushrooms into the stew when they think there's the dark spirit on the loose. That's haunting the farm.
So cool.
And so like all of the guards start like hallucinating and shit. So I mean, yeah, she's definitely
she also practices
quite tricksy.
She also practices some trickery on Alexander Skarsgård's character as well. Sorry, I cannot for the life of me remember any of these Nordic names, but
Hamlet is like the easiest one because it's almost Hamlet.
I know. But even still, she also practiced some trickery on him by waiting, I guess, goodish trickery to reveal that they are, from the same tree, that they have the same lineage.
Well, no,
she's pregnant.
She's pregnant with his kids.
She's continuing his lineage.
Yeah, but they also, unless I read into that wrong, they were implying that, like, they're in some capacity related.
No, she's carrying his lineage because she has his seed in her.
That's why he feels his blood in her because she's pregnant with their children. They're not related at all. He is Scandinavian, she is Slavic.
See, I thought my impression with that is that they were doing a thing where, get ready for some mental gymnastics, that they were, that because she's blonde, like, but she's from like the land of Rus, that like
Slavs are blonde too.
I know, but also that like his mother was a slave as well, and so it's like they come from the same place or something like that.
Yeah, but his mother,
and that was the impression I was under.
His mother is a slave from Brittany, which is a region of France. Oh,
well, never mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't think they're related, but like she does get pregnant with his children, and that's when he has the vision
one way or the other
of the tree that then extends beyond him with two children, which I do think is cool because part of Bjork's prophecy is about a maiden king.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when he has that vision of the tree, he sees two children, a boy and a girl, but the girl is the one who is crowned and carrying a sword. That was tight.
Well, apologies, I misread the incest vibes, but lucky for y'all, there still is some in this movie, which we can cut back to. Hooray!
It wouldn't be a medieval period piece without incest.
It really wouldn't, though. That's the thing. But
people be fucking their family back then.
They just do, It's I think pretty fundamental to the hero's journey, I guess. Hello Star Wars. The sequence I thought was pretty powerful. I kind of saw it coming from very early on in the film because it's foreshadowed with the introduction of Amleth. Well, first off, it's based on Hamlet. And there are a lot of connotations in Hamlet, you know, where he's talking about like the incestuous sheets and all that stuff. But and him kind of like, again, olden times can be hard to read, but like some of the ways like he describes like loving his mother, it's like, you know, but so there's already that going in.
Oedipal complexes are as old as Oedipus.
Hey! And so then you have that plus, what is it? Her introduction is him entering her chambers as she's being dressed. And she says, never enter my chambers unless I've given permission or whatever, which is neat because like that's also flashback to later on when he gets into their house the first time when they're at the farm, and he sees his uncle and her like, and she's like combing his hair, which is because that's also referenced because she says like her son, she tries to comb her son's hair and he says like I don't need that because he's trying to be a little man. And she says I know grown men who need their hair combed, and so we see her also combing the uncle's hair.
I also think part of the reason why she didn't want Amleth entering her chambers while she's getting dressed is because she has the slave mark brand,
right?
And we learned that like when he was little, she told him that like she was a nobleman or a noblewoman, but then we learn later that she was a slave that Arvindil decided to take as his queen.
And of course, we see that pattern again with Anya Taylor-Joy's character, which again is why I made that filial tie-in. Yeah. But I mean,
it's poetry; it rhymes.
Yeah.
But
it's just one part is rhyming. Yeah. But when he finally confronts his mother about it, as we spoke about earlier, you know, she says that like, no, I was with him all along. Like, this is always part of my plan. I wanted to kill him.
That monologue is fantastic. With
harrowing. Harrowing is the word.
And like that's
really
the
terrifying.
thing too, is like you wonder how much she like might be lying, but like especially I think in her conviction and you know especially how after that when she's telling Fjolnir that like no, it's my fucking dastardly son Amleth back from the dead, you know, it's not some spirit or something. Like I get the feeling that she's telling the truth. Like she hated Ethan Hawke.
Yeah.
And she did want Fjolnir to kill him.
It's neat too because we do get a scene not from Amleth's perspective at the very beginning where she is trying really hard to fuck Ethan Hawke.
Oh yeah, she's like,
and Ethan's like, no, I can't risk it. I might die fucking you, and I need to die in battle. Sorry, babe.
She's like, I haven't seen you in a season. Let's go to bed. And he's like, nah, I gotta go run around on all fours with my son in a hole in the ground. and my boy Willem Dafoe. I gotta. It's like no.
Sorry, babe. Saturdays for the boys.
Sorry, babe. I haven't seen you in a whole season, but we're not fucking tonight. I'm going to play in the ground with my boys.
Yeah.
Dudes rock.
Dudes rock. Yeah. So you know, she and then she really pulls some evil shit and then makes it out like, and it's interesting too because like you can also see like her doing this like survivalistically because it's like, I mean, fucking look at the guy, like he's gonna kill the whole village. He's
the bear wolf.
Yeah, he's the bear wolf. Like he's a big scary dude and he's out for vengeance. So she also like you can see it almost from her perspective as like survivalistically making a play there, and she's like, yo, hey, but if you kill him and you get your revenge, does that mean that like I'm your queen now?
Your queen.
Yeah, that's fucked up, man. That's fucked up. And
she does kiss him.
Yeah, they make out. Yeah, that's the whole thing. He's conflicted.
Yeah.
And then then he pushes her away and he's just like, yo, what the fuck? And he leaves. Which, I mean, talk about like total nightmare scenario. Like that is, you know, which of course he regularly uses that term like nightmare. And you know, like,
but it's their nightmare.
It's their nightmare.
But is it really?
No. No, could it be?
It's both.
It's both.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a huge turning point for him because the mantra that he's been repeating for 20 years is, I will avenge you, father, I will save you, mother, I will kill you, Fjolnir. And one of those three big tenets, I will save you, mother, is like, oh shit, she doesn't need saving. This is what she wanted. It was her idea.
And like in storytelling, like there's this really nice like kind of wheel that sort of breaks down like a lot of like your stand, and again, like conventions are broken all the time and they should be, but like in that standard, a really key point is like bad things happen. Hero has to leave home. Hero goes on a journey. Hero gets a magic sword. Hero comes back home, or hero defeats the guy or whatever. Hero comes back home changed. They flip those around, and I really like that. So hero comes back home changed, and this is like that moment, and they use it for horror, which is really cool. Like, normally it's like, oh, well, the hero comes back home and he's different and everything else, which is also true. But here it's like he comes back to, and home is not the location, right? Like, home is his mother, essentially. And he comes back to find that, like,
she doesn't want him.
She doesn't want him.
She even says in her monologue, she's like, I gave my blessing for you to be killed.
Yep.
So you couldn't take over the kingdom.
Wow.
And it's like,
spooky shit.
Damn, Mom, for real?
For real?
For real?
Yeah.
And he still doesn't kill her there because he won't kill a woman. But then he does kill her later after she stabs him a couple of times.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about his sword. I just want to mention the couple of times.
The hungry blade.
The night blade that the witch in the hills, who I think all of the witches and prophesizers in this movie are actually the same character. That's just my theory.
Oh.
In different forms.
Just your game theory.
That's just my game theory. But, when he's telling him about the sword, he's like, the sword can only be drawn at night or at the gates of hell. Yeah. And we do see that is true a couple of times.
Just can't.
That the sword cannot be drawn during the daytime or as soon as the sun starts to rise. Even that first night when he gets it and he goes back and he's trying to find a place to hide it, and like Fjolnir is out with like the dog and like they almost catch him. It's like the rooster starts crowing and he tries to unsheathe the sword and he can't. They do a great little comedic gag later after he's been captured, and they hang him up in the shed and they're like beating him, and one of the guards like has his sword and like tries to unsheath it and can't.
Yeah, it's No-No's, our wonderful comic relief, who keeps coming back up.
Yes, No-No's.
Which we haven't mentioned yet, but like when Amleth is like running away, like he's the guard that, as a child, he's the guard that tries to grab him, and Amleth like cuts his nose off to escape. And the guard, in shame, says that he killed him and he dropped him in the sea. He
sank like a stone.
He sank like a stone, and so he can not bear the shame of losing his nose to a child, which is very cool. And I love how he comes back up like regularly, and it's like, when is this guy gonna fucking die? Because it takes a long time. Like Amleth like kills a lot of other people in the village before he goes down.
Kill him. Yeah, until he does.
Until he does, and in the best way, by shoving his night blade through his nostril cavity.
Nose hole.
Yeah. I love it too, like how little regard Amleth ever gives him. Like, and the film as well. Like he's not treated as like a sub boss. He's not treated as like anything else. He's just the guy he cut his nose off when he was a kid, and he's like he's reduced to comic relief. And I just like that. Yeah, where he tries to draw the sword. I like that bit, and he just chucks it to the side.
He's like, and he just throws it in the corner, which of course conveniently leaves it there for Amleth to grab when the ravens chew through his ropes and free him.
Which again is like a really nice like repetition on that theme, because like he lets Amleth essentially get away and survive out of laziness and guilt.
Yeah,
and he does the same thing.
He's bad at his job.
And he does the exact same thing with the sword there. So like even though it's like a really dumb thing for a guard to do, like it's like pre-established in that guard's character, and it works really well for it.
Yeah. But you know what? It's perfect because especially him like leaving the sword there is kind of like a Deus Ex Machina, which, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I was in school, like Hamlet was one of the big examples of like uses of Deus Ex Machina when like our literature teacher was trying to teach us like about that literary device, is using examples in Hamlet. So I think that's kind of fun that there's some of that in this movie too.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject of Hamlet, when Amleth goes to the witch in the hills in the cave, he has the skull of Willem Dafoe of Hamir, and he has in true Hamlet fashion, he has his "alas, poor Yorick" moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
He even says "poor Hamir" because after Fjolnir killed his father, he cut out Hamir's eyes and tongue and ears. But this old witch took his head and fashioned him new eyes and tongue.
Which is super cool because it is also, in some capacity, a reference to Mimir, which is neat.
Oh, yeah, you're
Didn't
right.
think about that, did
I
ya?
did not even think about it. I was only thinking about Hamlet.
And I remember what my original intro name was going to be. I was going to be a member of the Talking Heads.
Oh, well.
I think Valkaleev is better.
Valkaleev is better.
But, yeah.
Should we, while we were talking about Valkyries, we get one cool Valkyrie scene in this.
Do y'all know, I'm sure there's like a historic reason for it or
I already
whatever.
know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's like...
The teeth?
Yeah.
The teeth.
Why she got
Yes.
braces?
Yeah, so I saw an interview with Eggers about this.
Yeah.
They actually found ancient teeth of Vikings where they had, kind of...
Filed lines in their
Yeah.
teeth.
Wild.
And he said it looked cool.
They don't know
So-
exactly why they did, but they think that they would file these lines in their teeth and fill them with colored enamel for aesthetic purposes, but also as like intimidation tactics in battle. When they're baring their teeth at their enemies, they have like these
Let me
weird,
see your grill.
these weird like
gangsta grills.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, ancient gangsta grills.
Fucking awesome.
So the Valkyrie has those in this, but it's only in like one shot, and it does kind of look like braces. I saw that same Robert Eggers interview that you did, and he's like, yeah, it's not braces. We went with black, but maybe we should have gone with a different color, because it does kind of look like the Valkyrie is wearing braces. But man, that sequence is so fucking cool,
so
though.
awesome.
Well, because like the ravens are the ones who free him, and then we see.
speaking of Deus Ex Machinas,
we see Odin standing there with a raven perched on each shoulder. And then he's being carried away on horseback by a Valkyrie. And we then learn it's like Anya Taylor-Joy came back for him. But she has the hair of a Valkyrie. That's what Fjolnir says earlier. But yeah, man, that fucking... The shot where it's like following the horse and she like rides off the cliff and it like falls and the camera goes down and then she's like galloping across the sky like into the aurora. So fucking cool, man.
Gorgeous.
So
Stunning.
fucking cool.
Another great example of great CGI.
Yes.
Man, I imagine seeing that shot in IMAX. Like, I'm not one for...
I'm glad we got to
generally-
see
we
it in
saw it in
Dolby.
Dolby.
We saw it, like, Dolby is the perfect way to see it. It just would also be fun to see that sequence in IMAX. Because, like, IMAX is frankly a terrible way to, like, watch, like, cinema, kino movies. Because, like, it's like... You can't see it all like at once, it's like it's surrounding your vision. Frankly, like movies in IMAX, good movies in IMAX should be like Transformers movies and shit. But I do think this movie would be fucking fun in
Ben and
IMAX.
I went and saw Ambulance in IMAX.
That's
no
a
way.
misnomer, actually, because most IMAX movies are not the
They're not the dome.
The dome.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize that either.
Really?
Because where we grew up, we had
the dome.
Our IMAX was at the Explorium, which was the dome.
We had a Science Station dome as well in Cedar Rapids.
But yeah, when we went to see Ambulance at the
Really?
same theater in IMAX, yeah, it's just
an
a
extra
bigger
large
screen.
And
And
honestly,
it's slightly curved.
yeah, and it's not even that much bigger than the Dolby screen,
No.
in my opinion. And honestly, the Dolby experience is much better.
because
Oh, in
you have
every
the-
way.
you have the better sound, and also
sound
the
design.
IMAX theater has those uncomfortable ass seats. The
Yeah.
Dolby's got the comfy
Yeah.
seats.
Yeah.
True that. True that.
This is uninteresting for the listeners.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm just glad we saw it that last night in Dolby.
Yeah, same. Before they put the secrets of
going back to
Dumbledore
it,
in Dolby.
With that beautiful surround sound came out of the spiritual sequences. I think exclusively the only use of like modern instruments with electronica. There's some ambient scoring, and it's only in those sequences when she's like in the last shots of the movie when she's ascending through the gate, like to the like what would assumably be like the Rainbow Bridge.
In Valhalla.
Into Valhalla. Like you hear like celestial ambience. Like just done on synthesizers, and it's only in those surreal, dreamlike sequences where, much like the visual CG, digital music is being used, whereas the rest of the film, it's largely analog with wolf sounds or just people chanting and singing, which is super cool.
The score is incredible.
Really?
Robert Eggers always has great scores, but goddamn, this is like a next level.
Yeah,
the music is so good.
The sound design is also great. I mean, especially in Dolby, where you can feel it all around you.
You've got the full stereo sound.
One interesting article that I saw on the score is they never found any evidence of percussion or drums in Viking culture, yet they use it predominantly in the score of this. And I think it works so well, even though it's maybe not historically accurate. It's that feeling of historical accuracy
there's lots
that
of
pulls it through.
There's lots of instances of like warriors in this movie banging spears and swords on their shields.
Exactly.
Which is percussive. And maybe if like Viking, I have a hard time believing that Viking cultures didn't have any kind of like hide drums or anything like that. But even if not, there's no fucking way that during festivals and like singing and music that warriors weren't fucking banging their shields.
Exactly.
Like,
and it works so well for the tension and the drive of a lot of these sequences.
Lots of throat singing, some tastefully used hurdy-gurdy.
They hurdied the gurdy, all right.
Yeah, man, this score is next level.
So one thing to consider also is why a lot of this culture was lost. Because it's not a big theme in the film. It's always sort of creeping in from the outlines, and something I really wanted to make a note of talking about on this podcast. And that is the dawn of Christianity and the rise of Christianity, like through these lands, and how a lot of this ancient history was lost because of
it was destroyed
by the Christians,
by the invading Christians.
And there was only a couple of slight nods to it. Clearly, like they've been invading Christian lands, so they come back with some Christian.
Some of the slaves are Christian.
I believe the artifact that is given to Amleth at the beginning is Christian, like his father is possibly like raiding a Christian settlement. Hard to say, but
he gives him like a medallion
of some kind.
His neck. Yeah.
And also, very notably, the slaves, half of which are sent to Fjolnir, the other half are sent to Constantinople, which is, a big note, because that's our core historical city of that represents the change to Christianity. And my favorite bit of dialogue in the movie is when they're beset by Amleth and they think he's some night specter.
He kills a couple of the warriors and like cuts them up and like nails their body parts to like a wall in like a grotesque fashion.
In a grotesque fashion, like resembling a horse, which is really fucked up and horrifying. Like, and what a practical too. You get some really close-up shots of it, and it's really gritty realism.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's supposed to be Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse.
Yeah.
Because Amleth
is a worshiper. I didn't even think about that. That's really cool. Yeah. Holy shit.
But to your point is that
he's questioning.
His half-brother, Thorir, Fjolnir's oldest son, blames the Christian slaves for doing this because their god is a corpse nailed to a tree.
Which is fucking awesome. That's such a cool like external way of like looking back at Christianity. Is like, their god is a corpse nailed to a tree. And
I just think it's funny that he calls them Christian heathens as well.
Yeah, so rad.
Because especially like post the widespread of Christianity, any sort of paganism is considered heathenism. Yeah. Heathen. Right?
I'm not heathen. You're heathen. Yeah. But what's also cool about that is no, their god is a corpse nailed to a tree. And if you had to summarize Amleth, he's a corpse nailed to a tree. Like he is a dead man walking, nailed to his family lineage. like nailed to his tree. Like,
Well,
I really like that. I think that's a cool way to look at
there's
it.
There's also the legend of how Odin gained infinite knowledge
From Mimir.
from hanging himself from Yggdrasil, from the Tree of Knowledge, from being hung for I want to say 9 days and 9 nights. He died and hung from the Tree of Knowledge, and then when he came back to life, he had omniscience.
Yeah. So we still needed to know about the bitches, so he cut off Mimir's head.
Yeah, that's right.
To learn more about women. Which I like because that also comes into play with Willem Dafoe's character. I really like that because Willem Dafoe is the one who has the knowledge of women, which is another like reference to him sort of being like a pseudo Mimir figure. And like what's his first line? Like when Ethan Hawke returns home, the uncle comes out and he says something, and then Willem Dafoe makes a bawdy joke about the queen fucking anybody.
Well, she offers Fjolnir her drinking horn, and he says, "See how the queen's cup becomes wet for a man other than her king."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is funny because
he has that knowledge of women.
She was, but also she was fucking Fjolnir.
Yeah, he was right.
He was right.
Right, he was right. He has that knowledge, and like his knowledge, like, and that's what
why I think that's why Fjolnir reacts so aggressively too.
Yeah,
when he's like, "Silence, dog!"
Yeah,
and Ethan Hawke is like, "Nah, he's got a bawdy mouth, but he's my boy.
He's just a jester.
He's just a jester." Yeah,
and I really like that. I hadn't thought about that until like just now, but like that's just another way like he's sort of paralleled with Mimir.
The well of knowledge.
Let's talk about that incredible volcano fight sequence.
Yeah,
holy fuck!
It's about time.
Yeah, there's a volcano fight sequence in this movie, y'all.
Well, yeah. So of course, the prophecy says that Emleth will take his vengeance at the gates of hell, and drown his enemy in a lake of fire. So after he has killed his mother and Fjolnir's son and basically taken everything from him, Fjolnir comes in and says, "Meet me at the gates of hell." There's a volcano on the island. We see it erupting a few times. Emleth goes to meet Fjolnir in battle at the gates of hell. It's the only time he's able to draw his blade in the daytime.
Only one L in hell.
Yes, in the true Nordic fashion, HEL. But holy shit, that fucking fight scene in the volcano is the coolest.
It's so good.
Incredible.
It's so well shot. I saw that the studio made Robert Eggers CG out Emleth and Fjolnir's penises though.
Oh,
because they're fighting naked.
Yeah.
They have to.
And so the studio said, no, even though this is an R-rated movie, no schlongs.
Yep.
You got to CG those out. And Robert Eggers was giving an interview saying that he wanted their dicks to be in that scene.
Kind of homophobic.
Yeah,
honestly,
kind of homophobic on behalf of the studio.
Yeah, dudes rock. We gotta get this cocks out.
Yeah.
And like,
I mean, like, what is more masculine than two men fighting naked inside of a volcano?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Nothing.
And yeah, that's a shame. Well, release the penis cut.
I think give it a couple years, give it a few years.
We're gonna get
I think we'll see a Robert Eggers
director's cut
of the Northman, because I heard they also made him cut down the prologue quite a bit.
Which means there's got to be more Ethan Hawke and other stuff, which would be so cool.
That we lost about 30 minutes of this movie.
I can see this movie being about 3 hours long in its full form.
Yeah. And given the opportunity to take intermissions,
and would be happy to see it.
Same.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this kind of film is so immersive, and like so much comes with that. And again, that's what intermissions are for.
Yep.
I think that the recent The Batman movie is a lot more tolerable. Like if you pause and can get up, because it's a fucking superhero movie. I don't care, but like this movie, let it be 3 hours long. Fucking awesome. I'm here for it.
Yeah, and I will say this movie doesn't really feel its length, in my opinion. Like, it is
I was never
deliberately
bored.
played.
I felt like there was some stuff that was like quickly paced, and like
Yeah.
I would have liked to sit
Yeah.
for a little bit longer and appreciate the film.
I genuinely felt like I could feel the studio's cuts, especially in
Yeah.
like I'd say in like the first 30 minutes of the film. Like the pace of that feels faster than what I would expect from Robert Eggers, and like
Yeah.
it still works. But I do, especially reading that he had to make a lot of cuts, especially to the first part of the film. Like I think you can definitely feel that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that fucking volcano fight scene is so incredible. Most of it's done in silhouette.
I love how it's shot in silhouette because I feel like it's so readable. Every
Yeah.
impact that happens, it's so understandable.
The
what's
choreography
going
is
on.
really clear
Yeah.
and easy
It's
to
so
track.
well choreographed.
Which is great because it's well choreographed, right?
Yes.
Which is the opposite of how like a lot of films do it. Like they have to incorporate like a shaky camera or, like fuck with the lighting or put a bunch of lasers and things in there to hide the fact that the choreography isn't very good.
I've seen
but
some
here,
clips of
they
fight scenes from the latest Marvel Spider-Man movie, and I swear to God, these fucking Marvel goons do not know how to choreograph fight scenes. The fight scenes in all of these Marvel movies are fucking terrible.
Yeah.
They're so badly choreographed, but this is an example of great choreography.
Yeah.
Well, and also because like it's done in long takes set back, so like the combat is like the focus, like the choreography is the focus.
Their war culture, it has to be.
I think the cool thing about it being in silhouette too, I mentioned this to Ben after the first time we saw it, but it almost feels like a shadow puppet show.
Yeah.
Which is, like a great historical way of like telling stories is with like these kinds of shadow puppet shows, and it feels sort of like
It's reduced to its
seeing-
purest form.
Yeah.
Now, I'll say
Seeing the story
You know
passed
what it
down.
reminded me of?
What's that?
A much dumber movie, but
fine.
there's a few fight sequences in the Book of Eli that do the same thing
That's true. That's true.
with the silhouettes.
It's
I'm right.
reminded me of episode 3 of Star Wars.
Oh well, no, but that's
I
the
mean,
big
of
one.
course,
Like
the
that's
most
honestly like it was only ever so slightly tainted
have the
by
high
that.
ground.
I think like during the fight scene, like I leaned over to both of y'all like separately, and I just went, "I hate you," because
Yeah.
it's very much that.
Can never have a volcano fight scene without thinking of that. But,
I think one thing I'll note also, like obviously, like it's an epic moment, and we need to have them like next to a river of lava. Obviously, like sorry, I'm in Neil deGrasse Tyson this and take a lot of fun out of it, but like clearly, like in reality, you cannot be anywhere near that close to lava without combusting. Like really, like if they were to actually have that fight at the gates of hell, they need to do it like on the ridge, and even still, they'd be naked and sweltering. But like their
Suck
feet
my
were
dick.
melted. Yeah.
Suck my dick. Fuck that.
Yeah. No, it needed to
Do
be there.
whatever
It's
they want.
Please
it's
don't
an
change
epic
it. Like, it's great.
yeah.
But,
I mean, it's not even a volcano. It's literally the gates of hell, Cleveland. They're literally fighting to the death at the gates of hell, and they kill each other simultaneously. Fjolnir stabs Amleth through the heart at the exact moment that Amleth decapitates Fjolnir. And I mean, it just of
It's
course,
not a feel near death experience. He kills him.
Oh no, they dead. But of course, Amleth gets the dignity of the slightly slower death, so he can have the dying vision of Anya Taylor-Joy safe with their children, and then the Valkyrie descending from Valhalla to carry him into the gates.
I like that our last reference back to Anya Taylor-Joy is in his vision, so that we don't actually know like what happens to her, because like in all likelihood she's right?
It's hard to say. Well,
What's cool though,
they're taking her to apparently Amleth has like family in some kingdom or something who are still rich, and he does give Ralph Ineson his father's ring, and he says, take her here and they'll give you 9 times this worth when you get there. So like, yeah, maybe
That's
his
how banking
family
was started.
maybe his family is still there and they'll
the equivalent
take
of a
her
banknote.
in. But I will say another one of my like favorite moments in the movie is after Amleth jumps overboard and swims back to the island, and Anya Taylor-Joy like summons the wind to carry them away. That shit is dope.
It's so cool.
It's so fucking cool.
So cool.
So fucking cool.
I really like that sequence. It's perfectly done. But what I do like is that they both get on the boat. They're orchestrating their passage, and they have a bit of a spat. You know,
Well,
and it's a spat about legend. So he's like, "Oh, you're pregnant with
He
my
learns
kids."
that she's pregnant. It's like, well,
I gotta go, and she's like, "No, please don't go. Fuck you. No, I'm gonna go. Fuck you." And then he just like dives off the side of the boat, and it kind of reminded me of like this is like the historic like equivalent of like a couple fighting at a Denny's, and it's like the Ralph Ineson's character on the boat is just like I was just trying to like ship passage,
like,
you know.
right.
I just work here, and like this couple's like fighting on a boat, and then the husband just like leaps off the side and like swims away, and it's like, all right, I guess, you know. It's like a couple fighting at a Denny's.
But then after the husband leaves the Denny's, if the wife starts speaking a different language and then like summons a fucking whirlwind that tears down the Denny's.
I've worked service. I've seen it. All kinds of crazy shit happens.
Her little monologue there is great, and I mean it's props to Anya Taylor-Joy because like that's one of most of the movies in English. But, you know, there are a few moments where they do different languages, and whatever the archaic Slavic language that is, she nails it perfectly, has this fucking awesome monologue about, you know, carry me safely to these lands and I'll plant 1,000 birch trees so your tempests can rattle the branches or whatever.
She's just trying to plant 1,000 trees. You know, in a lot of ways, she's a lot like Mr. Beast.
Oh,
no.
No, of course not.
No.
Fuck no.
Sort of on the subject of like the language and stuff, it's not necessarily language related, but one thing I really appreciated about this movie is that Hollywood certainly has a tendency for any sort of like fantasy movies or, you know, big movies that are set in Europe or different cultures to just give all of the actors British accents if they're speaking English, because, you know, there has to be some effort to make it not American, but not alienating enough to make it other or whatever. Yeah. But everybody in this movie does like great Nordic, Slavic, Scandinavian accents.
You know, I'm not gonna lie, Ethan Hawke's a great actor, but even still, when I saw him like first approach her, I was like, oh, I didn't realize that Ethan Hawke was the dad. I was like, oh god, is he gonna do a Scandinavian accent? And then he did, and it was great,
and it was good.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
Nailed it.
Like even and I was really like pleasantly surprised. And I shouldn't have been. Like I've never seen him in a bad role. Like, I mean,
but like the little kid too, who plays young Amleth, does a very convincing like Scandinavian accent.
I feel like I've seen that kid in another movie too. I was trying to figure it out.
Yeah, you did. He's young Bruce Wayne in the new Batman movie.
Okay.
Recently, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, recently, of course, Ethan Hawke is also he's the villain in Moon Knight.
Oh, really? I didn't even realize.
Yeah, he has glass in his feet, in his shoes, and it's okay.
Well,
dumb things.
Before we rate, I think there's two things that I wanted to discuss briefly.
I think I've covered all my stuff.
One was the discourse.
The discourse.
Oh, we have to talk about the discourse.
I think we should mention it at least.
Yeah, we do, I guess.
I want to say, and I want to emphasize, while this movie in itself is not problematic, this movie is not an alt-right movie by any means.
No.
There are definitely going to be alt-right people that are a little too into this movie, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to emphasize that does not make the movie in itself
no more than fucking Mad Men being sexist, right? Like you get like, so when Mad Men is always my favorite example of this, because when Mad Men like first blew up and people were throwing Mad Men parties and stuff, there was a lot of talk about like guys who were going around like cosplaying Don Draper and missing the point.
Yeah.
And I personally spoke with people, and like it was like a media thing as well, that like the problem was on Mad Men for doing that. And I always fucking hated that, because like Mad Men makes it extremely clear that Don Draper is not a good guy. You know, that like Don Draper is troubled and problematic and has a lot of things that he's trying to work through. And that like he's not really a guy to be cosplayed. And especially in the ways that he was being by a lot of these like a lot of like bro-y dudes and stuff. And I see the same thing in this movie, where like people disappointed. It's like, well, the film is not like, quote, problematic in my eyes at all. It features a lot of problematic content.
Well, and also,
if that makes sense, or subject matter, I guess.
Yeah, we live in a day and age where there is not only is there hypersensitivity, but there is a sort of resurgence of like far right extremism and neo-Nazism in all through Western and non-Western cultures, and like fucking losers do, the Nazis loved appropriating things from other cultures that they found cool. They appropriated a lot of Roman shit, a lot of Viking, like Nordic shit, and of course, like modern neo-Nazi groups continue to do the same thing.
So with fascism in general comes a sense of collectivism, right? And what is a prominent aspect of social collectivism but fashion? And so like hence like the Hugo Boss jackboots and all the rest of it. And like it will always influence popular media in some capacity, because like at the end of the day, the hard shitty truth is that a lot of that fashion just looks really fucking cool, which is a big problem. And like but like it's one that like I've certainly made peace with. My favorite like recent example is, holy shit, there were so many shots in the new Batman movie where they feature his fucking bat jackboots, and like he looks fashy as shit in that film. And frankly,
Batman is kind of fashy.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he's a dystopian, like,
he's an authoritarian
figure, like,
sure.
police state hero, for sure.
I think,
but like it like the unfortunate reality is that like the politics, vile, the aesthetic, it looks cool. People like it. People respond to it for a reason.
I think
because collectivism.
I think what's important too, especially when it comes to something like the Northman, is that it is absolutely valid to discuss and critique the politics of a piece of art.
Yes.
But I do not think it is valid to critique the politics of people who like a work of art.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And in that I mean, it's like there are always going to be shitty people who like some of the same things that you do. But that doesn't like the fact that some neo-Nazi assholes might get fucking hard for the Northmen because it's, a bunch of buff white dudes slinging swords at each other, does not mean that the art in and of itself expresses any of those kind of...
Yeah, and I mean, this is a clear example of separating the art from the artist, too. Because, like, I think there are some elements of that in the film, but, like, that doesn't mean Robert Eggers is fashy by any means.
Well, the film is not fashy, and I don't even think this is a case where you have to separate the art from the artist, because Eggers himself is on record, as you even mentioned earlier in the podcast, Ben, being like, I don't know if I necessarily want to make a historical Viking thing because of the co-opting of a lot of this symbolism by far-right movements. Like, Eggers himself is opposed to that, and is saying that, like, the movie does not espouse that kind of politics at all. And I don't know how an intelligent person can watch this movie and think that the movie does have those kind of politics. I think
it's a matter of, I think a lot of these takes are people like watching the trailer and stopping there.
Yes.
I also think that like, here's my little piece on this too. I'm going to take it a step further and say that we need to have media like this, because that shows us these times in history and like these aspects, because first off, they were real and they happened. And you need to fucking grow up and recognize that, you know, like we need to recognize that, like, these cultures, by doing like the Assassin's Creed cosplay thing and like making them out to be like more moral than they were or whatever else like that is a disservice to reality, in that we need to recognize like these people in these times in history for what they were, because these things can always happen again. And you also, frankly, know thy fucking enemy, and like to understand like what cultural aspects, you know, like are indicative of patriarchy, are indicative of slavery, come from understanding it. And like this movie is perfect for that. It's such a wonderful like opportunity to see, just to get a glimpse into why people like that at that time, you know, and to better recognize how to keep that shit from happening again.
Also,
and I just so like as someone who like is very gladly to say like I'm progressive, like and queer, you know, and like all the rest of it. Like, I revel in this stuff because like it's important to understand where this shit comes from. Also, so you can stop it.
From a cultural perspective, I think that it's important to not just roll over and let fucking Nazis take this kind of shit from the rest of us.
Yeah. God,
That's the thing, is like, the fact that there is any discourse around the quote-unquote politics of this movie is fucking insane to me, to begin with. And that just goes to show the fact that we're letting people see Nordic runes and be like, oh, that's fascist. Just because a lot of fucking Nazis have tried to co-opt that kind of symbolism, I say don't let them fucking have it.
Yeah,
I
take
agree.
it back.
I think, frankly, it's indicative of a brain rot of all of society on both sides.
Yes.
Of all art must be political. Like, the concept of all art being political is not correct.
No.
Like, inherently, like, this film is not necessarily political in a contemporary standard.
No.
Like, it may be historical, sure. Like, it may be indicative of historical politics, but it's not indicative of contemporary politics.
Nor should it be.
No.
To frame it as being specifically right or left is doing it a disservice.
It's idiocy, frankly. Yeah.
Or like that woman on
Totally missing
like that
the point.
woman on Twitter who tried to be like, ooh, a movie about Vikings that uses Nordic runes and Robert Eggers has that haircut. This is sending fash. You know, like that.
Let's just like I do want to say, like, let's just remember that fortunately it's a person on Twitter.
Yeah,
it's frankly largely like,
it's not real life.
Twitter,
it's not real life.
Yeah, Twitter is largely composed of vocal minorities.
But these people do exist in real life.
Small groups of people who are, you know, like vocal and have little standing. Well, of course they've always existed. You know, like dumb takes are also a part of history.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
like
But it's easier
so I'm not.
Now, it's easier now than ever for people's dumb takes to spread to more people and to infect more people.
It is. I think
that a big part of the reason why. It's only one part of the problem, but a big part of the reason why this film has not been doing super well box office wise, I think it does have something to do with some of that discourse. Variety put out an article about how this is like a male power violence fantasy.
This is actually a great segue. I wanted to do a bit of a post-mortem, right? Because this movie, $70 to $90 million epic, unfortunately has not done super well at the box office. Opening weekend, not to spoil our predictions, $12 million.
Oof.
Not great.
Hurts. Yeah.
Why do you think it underperforms so much?
I think there's a myriad of reasons. I think everything we just referenced is a small part. Has a small part to play for sure. I also do think that, like, as phenomenal as this film is, something that we've praised this film for a lot is also deeply at the root of it, which is that the protagonist is not inherently good. But
the cultural climate right now absolutely clamors for ethically black and white characters
Right.
in movies.
And it's
I think that is
to,
a big
to the
part of
degree
it.
that like even the movies that should be about anti-heroes, even for comic books, even for fucking comic books like Venom and Morbius and all that other bullshit, like even those films are pushing to turn these villains into protagonists because your average viewer like doesn't want to, like, I shouldn't say can't, but doesn't want to break. They don't want to experience the perspective of a protagonist that is not pure and just.
Yep.
Like your average person, respectfully, like wants to, like respectfully, wants to watch a movie where they can role play as the hero.
Where they can feel good coming out the other, they can
other
feel
end.
good about it coming out the other side.
And this
I
movie
think
does not serve to that.
That is one part of like the sort of pervasive cultural.
It sells
plot.
it, and this movie does sell itself as something where you will. Even Hamlet paints Hamlet as the good guy.
He's the good guy.
He's the good guy.
Yeah.
So like in this film, and this film is largely selling itself on the same principles of like, I'm gonna get my vengeance. That's the whole trailer, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna get my vengeance, and so like it's like, yeah, he's the good guy. He's gonna get revenge, and like by the end of this film,
but that's the
something-
thing.
That's
Like,
the
I don't
studio.
think people know that until after they've seen the movie. From the marketing, they see clear, historical epic, gladiator-esque.
Yeah.
I think there's a few things that played into why this movie didn't do so well. Obviously, first, like, it's a historical action movie based on something that isn't clearly existing IP. Amleth and Hamlet is existing IP, but it's not clearly that in its marketing. It's the Northman. It's something new that people don't know.
It's not called
It's,
Hamlet.
The fact that it's almost 2.5 hours probably plays against it in some respects.
Only in the respect that it is the type of movie that it is. I don't think the length in and of itself turns people away, because people will sit through any Marvel or Star Wars movie for almost 3 hours, because they all are these days.
But existing IP.
But that's
the combo.
thing. It's the combination. I think that there is a pervasive cultural rot in terms of what people want and expect to see in the cinema.
I think,
theatrically.
it's, to some
it's
degree, I think that rot has like always been there, but I do agree. Like,
I disagree. I think that it's
what was the concert that had the riots? Like, I kind of like
Astro World.
No.
the old the Woodstock
Rite of Spring?
99.
Rite of Spring.
Okay, but that's
like,
yeah, but that was something that was a work of art that was truly transgressive, and I don't think that something like this is that transgressive. I think it's that the culture of what people expect to see and want to see in the cinema no longer caters to this type of movie. I saw somebody on Twitter compare this to Gladiator, which is a movie that came out in 2000, I believe, 2001, and which is also a historical epic action film that did it incredibly well. It did super well at the box office. It was nominated for all kinds of awards. It was starring well-known actors. And I think that The Northman is the same type of movie that Gladiator is, and that if it had been released even 10 years ago, it would have a similar reception to a film like Gladiator.
I have a different
you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right, because I think this is an example of the collapse of monoculture and the tightening of monoculture to big tent poles of existing IPs that were around before the collapse of monoculture. Because, like, when there was an element of TV that everyone watched, a homogenous culture that everyone consumed that was within a smaller boundaries, people discovered movies that weren't new IPs or weren't existing IPs like this and would flock around them. You saw a slew of historical epics that did so well in the box office. Things like Braveheart, Kingdom of Heaven, Gladiator, all these different movies that did super well at the box office. And that's because, you know, culture wasn't so spread out. Nowadays, everyone has their own microculture because of the internet, because of spread out streaming platforms. There's not something that culture as a whole is focused on, and because of that,
except the macro culture of Disney properties.
Yes, because
Marvel,
those
Star
existed
Wars,
before the collapse.
Exactly. Comic books, Star Wars, even in horror movies, we see the type of movies that get a lot of advertising, and it's all remakes or requels or whatever of existing IP.
It's grasping onto that monoculture that was.
Yeah.
It's not here anymore, and because of that, you know...
Recessed. I have some slight differing opinions. Slight. Albeit, I think that like those things do come into play for sure. I mean, like there's clear like data-based evidence of like how much Disney has fucked cinema. Like we can look at that all day, and I agree with those numbers. That said, I think Gladiator is an interesting comparison, and I think that when it comes to like scope and how much I enjoyed the movie, I would agree with Gladiator first, but I would largely. I think that there are a lot of other examples, both also ones that's made by Ridley Scott as well, that I would closer pair this film to. First off, Gladiator also has a very clear protagonist, and also Gladiator is, if it is R-rated, it's a soft R.
PG-13.
It is PG-13? Okay. I'd be curious to know for sure. But I think that Gladiator is also like somewhat more accessible for families. Who tend to pad box office numbers. And then also, like, there's a greater accessibility in Gladiator, and also Gladiator does pander to what we had mentioned previously, which is, like, cultural generalization of Westernization. Or to put it simply, like, they have British accents. And
sure.
like, it's more accessible in that sense, whereas this film is, like, partially, like relying on subtitles. And, like, even then, it's thick accents and a much less distinguishable culture.
It doesn't make that clear in the marketing. Like, this was marketed like a Gladiator.
In terms of, like, the trailers that you see for this movie, in terms of, like, what draws people to the theater, I think this is absolutely marketed in a way more accessible way. And it's like, if people get to the theater and see it and are like, wait, this isn't what I was expecting, like, at that point, that doesn't affect box office numbers opening weekend.
Like,
because at that point, they've already paid for their seats.
Yeah. Gladiator was R.
Gladiator was R.
There's another movie I really wanted to mention because it also involves Vikings and is R-rated, and it stars a well-known actor, and that's the 13th Warrior, which I actually just saw the other week for the first time. And it's a fun movie. 13th Warrior is particularly interesting because it is an adaptation in many capacities of Beowulf, starring Antonio Banderas of all actors. But it's about like a Middle Eastern character who is who joins a band of Vikings and goes to the Northlands, and and you know, he is the 13th warrior or whatever. He's sort of the odd man out because he's not a Viking, but he's in Viking society. In that he's an inherently good guy, all the rest of it. But the 13th Warrior is particularly interesting, just from a filmmaking perspective, because it was essentially entirely shot twice. It had a massive budget from that, of course, where there are lots of studio reworks, and it shows in the film, and also it absolutely flopped. And here we have like a big budget film that is also about Vikings and the rest that absolutely flopped. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not saying I do in bringing up 13th Warrior, but I do think that there are some interesting comparisons there. Sure. Now, the Northman was not entirely reshot, but there were it was sent back to the cutting room a number of times.
There were a number of cuts in post-production. I think the fact that something like the 13th Warrior had to be reshot shows a much higher degree of lack of faith from the studio,
A much shakier foundation.
that would absolutely translate to how they market and sell the film, because they have much less faith in it.
And but keep in mind too, with that consideration, with that film studio having much less faith, that is in the same culture. If anything, it's earlier than much earlier than Gladiator.
1 year earlier than Gladiator.
Yeah.
It came out in 1999. Gladiator came out in 2000.
Nicely researched. But the point is, so
difference.
okay. So it's the same time as Gladiator, and that culture was still pervasive then. So I don't know. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
And also like one last thing. Sorry, one last thing, and I'll cease my speaking. But that is that Ridley Scott tried to capture that same lightning in a bottle a second time with the Robin Hood film that he did. That was a bomb. Like, it did not do well. I didn't enjoy the film. And he tried to do a gritty take on Robin Hood, one of the most iconic IPs, and it fucking flopped. Y'all might have forgotten about that movie.
Again, I think that was pre and post monoculture. Robin Hood came out kind of at the end of monoculture, right? Like, monoculture really kind of ended around the end of the 2000s, early 2010s. And that was when this movie came out. And that's part of the reason why I think it bombed. And
Also, it's a dumb movie.
yeah, it was also not great.
It's not the best.
Ridley Scott doesn't put out all winners, but I do think what is an interesting recent comparison is one of the two films Ridley Scott put out last year, which was The Last Duel, which is another historical period piece based on a true story. Which we kind of clowned on when we saw the previews. I watched it, not bad. Pretty good, but ultimately did not do super well in terms of like box office, in terms of I don't think it didn't really get any nods at award shows or anything like that. And I mean, Jesus Christ, it's a fucking Ben Affleck and Matt Damon led film directed by Ridley Scott.
Yeah,
it's like that's the kind of thing.
2 nights.
That's the kind of thing that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, everybody would have been all about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But the culture has changed.
Yeah,
I will say
the culture of theatrical films has changed.
In respect to that movie, something that's really funny to me is a big meme that was going around for it was that Ridley Scott was quoted as saying that like the attendance was poor
because kids were looking at their phones.
And I asked my dad, who is, mind you, a historian. He's an old boomer historian. And I said, hey, and he said, oh yeah, well I watched The Last Duel. And I said, well, Dad, how'd you feel about it? And he said, I thought it was kind of boring. And so I'm like, yeah, it's just really funny.
I mean, it's like
to me,
Ridley
it's like,
Scott can say whatever. Ridley Scott can say whatever he wants. He's fucking 90. He's 90 goddamn years old.
And he's Ridley Scott. He's always said whatever he wanted.
Yeah, he still makes 3 goddamn films a year. Like what? Oh, an old boomer blames the lack of success of one of his movies on kids looking at their phones. Yeah. What a surprise! Right? Like
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to mention about the 13th Warrior is it's a John McTiernan movie.
Correct.
Director of Predator and Die Hard. Like, that's an interesting comparison in that the fact that even back then, a director's name alone doesn't always bring in seats. Well,
I mean, that's the thing is like if ultimately, no matter who's involved, if a studio loses faith in a movie before they release it, it's probably not going to do well.
Yeah. I mean, marketing is everything.
Marketing is everything, and a studio's faith in the ability of their film to have success, whether it does or not, can set up a lot of people's expectations. And if something like The Last Warrior had to be basically entirely shot twice, that shows that the studio didn't have enough faith in it, probably didn't market it very well because they expected it to flop. And that's one of those things where you kind of create your own reality. You expect it to flop, so you don't market it so it does flop, you know? I haven't seen the movie, so I can't speak to its quality. That is its own thing. But I do think that especially in like the last 6 or 7 years or so, we've really started to see a turn in like what does well theatrically. Jesus fucking Christ. Ben and I went to see Ambulance a few weeks ago, the new Michael Bay film. A name like Michael Bay attached to an action film 10 years ago, that shit would have
Sold itself.
destroyed the box office.
And honestly,
an Ambulance bombed.
Michael Bay's best film. On top of that, like Ambulance is probably his
it was
best
great.
film.
I don't like Michael Bay, and I loved Ambulance. Yeah. And it was fantastic. And we saw it in IMAX, and it did not do well.
Regular IMAX. As
IMAX,
pre-established.
yeah, not the dome, not the dome. But it's like the fact that in 2022 a Michael Bay action film bombs at the box office, I think is way more indicative of the box office culture than a film like Northman bombing, which is like, okay, sure, it's a historically accurate Viking epic made by a director who is like an indie art house horror darling. Like, okay, that's not necessarily setting up for like big box office success. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the fact that something like Ambulance bombs at the box office is like, man, people are not going to see movies unless it's got Spider-Man in it.
Yeah.
You know? Like that's
fucking depressing.
Yeah.
It is depressing.
Which is funny because
the death of Kino.
Oh my God.
Alas.
Alas, poor Kino.
Alas, poor Kino.
I knew him well. Which is funny to me too, because on the exact same flip, the most successful video game this year that's been dunking on all the rest is a weird, technically proficient, historically researched, strange, mechanically complex video game, Elden Ring.
Yeah, I mean,
it's very Norse inspired,
for sure.
And yeah,
the landscape of video games, the landscape of films is quite different. I don't know if it's quite a fair comparison, because with video games, it's tailored very specifically to like niche audiences. You bring it into your home, you buy the game, you play it at your house. You're not going to see a movie in the cinema.
Yeah,
like it's
but also movies
it's a
are
different
way
interaction.
cheaper to see, and also
yes.
like. I mean, of course, like video games have supplanted films since like 2006 or 2016 for a number of years now. Like video games have dominated,
but also like
entertainment.
FromSoft is, while not an enormous studio, they do have years and
legacy.
They have years of legacy and many games of extremely goodwill with a quite large audience.
Yes, an audience that is largely grown,
niche or otherwise. Mm-hmm. So, is it time to rate the Northman?
Yeah.
We've had a very long conversation on it.
Yes, good one too.
I mean, the same as all other Robert Eggers films. Like, he made another perfect film. He did it. Congration, he done it. 5 out of 5.
5 for me too.
Yeah, easy 5.
Golden pod.
Easy 5.
I mean, no surprise.
Yeah, and now we'll ride past the celestial gates into
Valhalla.
Yeah, gold
with the other golden pods.
Yeah, the Valhalla, the golden halls of Podhalla.
I will say we predicted this one.
Is good.
Yeah.
I think we got to remember that for the future.
Podhalla
is where the golden pods dwell.
Excellent. We did predict this one.
Yes.
So I'll start with Rotten Tomatoes. I predicted this would get a 92. TC predicted 90, and Cleve, you predicted 88.
Oh shit!
Now,
I saw. Oh man, I kind of saw this shit coming, didn't I?
Right now, it's sitting at 89.
Yo!
So that's directly.
Yep.
Oh shit!
We both get it.
Yeah.
Cleve and Tease both tie.
Wow! Look at us.
One away.
Yeah.
I was one over. You were one under.
How about
Incredible.
that? Yeah, between us, we have the right number.
As for collective rating, I hedged my bets and said 4.5, and both of you said 5. So you both get another point on
Dudes
that
rock,
one.
high five.
Dudes rock.
Hell yeah, we did it.
Finally, box office.
This is the tiebreaker.
Tease and I both predicted 18 million, and Cleve, you predicted 50 million.
I wish.
Right now, it's 12.3 opening weekend.
Oh man,
So you guys tied.
I wish Cleveland won that one.
Me too.
But
yeah, I mean, again, too, as I've said many times when we wrote these predictions, I was going for international, which we don't do.
So
I wanted this.
I still would have lost even with international.
Yeah, sadly, it's sitting at 6 points for me and 8 points for both of you.
I have a question.
Sure.
A curiosity. I don't think it would, but how did this movie do internationally in the box office?
It's funny you asked that. It's not doing great either. You know, it's interesting in Scandinavia, they're not really jumping at the bit for it because on one hand, they're saying problematic, depictions of their people raping and pillaging. On the other hand, it's like...
Y'all did that, though! What are y'all talking about? Y'all did that, though!
Yeah. On the other hand, the right is too woke, with the women.
Too woke women know how to do magic.
Yeah.
Oh, well, damn. Man, I'm going to be curious to see what Robert Eggers does next.
Yeah.
Since Nosferatu got shelved, I'm sure whatever it is going to be great. I'm sure that he's not going to stop. I'm glad that this movie exists. I don't think we'll ever see anything of its like in terms of scale from Robert Eggers again.
And I will say, even though this film bombed, I think this does a lot of good for the quote-unquote Robert Eggers brand.
Yeah.
To the point where I don't think he'll have trouble making more movies.
No.
In the future. A24 is always gonna distribute his shit. This is the first.
He's one of their like big money makers to begin with.
This is not an A24 film. This is a bigger studio. This was Focus Features.
Yeah.
Oh shit! I don't know.
This is
I
Robert
just assumed
Eggers.
this was an A24.
This is Robert Eggers' first non A24. It's too big. It's too big scale for A24.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even if this doesn't do well, which it hasn't, like, he'll always have a home at A24. Like, The Witch and The Lighthouse are both, like, huge indie horror darlings. Yeah. They're immensely popular within the culture. Like, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. I just hope Nosferatu happens eventually.
Yeah, agreed.
Next week is your pick, Ben.
Yes. So I wanted to do a little bit of counter programming. Northman is a very serious historical epic.
Very much so.
So I wanted to do something a little campier next week, and that's why I'm picking Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2.
Hell yeah. I've never seen it.
The accidentally homoerotic sequel to
Sweet.
the classic slasher Nightmare on Elm Street.
Dudes rock.
I'm stoked. Dudes rock. I've never seen that one.
I love it, and I think it's hilarious, and I'm super excited to talk about it.
Sponsor time.
All right, let's make it quick.
We'll do it quick.
All right. Yeah. Speaking of, if only there was an executive to edit down our runtime. Here we go. All right. This episode is brought to you by a real handsome guy. That's right, folks. He hamsome.
Alexander Skarsgård.
He ham.
He hamsome.
He hamsome. He's not hamming it up, but he's a ham boy.
But he's hamsome.
What does that mean? I leave that to your own personal interpretation. Thank you so much, Sponsor Shelf, for giving us another delightful sponsor this week.
Well, thank you, dear listener, for listening. If you like and appreciate the show, why don't you leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts? That would be cool.
You
can also...
You won't. All right, hopefully you will.
Hopefully you will, but you probably won't statistically. But you can also become a patron at patreon.com/podpeoplepod. Statistically you won't, but maybe you will.
Hey, be an anomaly.
Shout out to honorary pod boy Sam Simon. Sam, we love and appreciate you. You're probably one of the only people who has listened this far into this extremely long episode of the podcast. So shout out to you.
We love you.
Yeah.
Follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod on Twitter, and at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. You can follow me on Twitter at SomeSpookySnake.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm occasionally tuning for Light Arc Studios, who put out progress on It Stares Back. Behind the scenes, or in front of the scenes, things have been a little slow lately, but behind the scenes, things are cooking. Things are happening. Yes. It's going to be a long time, but we are We are making this game. I swear to God.
It's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. And then, of course, you can find my work via DreadXP as well, doing cool cover art and concept art and in-game 2D art as well for all of, or many of their phenomenal games. Just go to dreadxp.com to see more incredible work. And of course, you can find my work on ArtStation as well under Cleveland Mosier, though I have not updated in like a year and a half because I'm very busy painting. So, yeah, just go look at DreadXP stuff for some of the cool stuff I'm painting right now. And that's it for me.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, we will see you in Valhalla.